Hi everyone, welcome back to Brookdale Farm. Today we're going to be doing a bit more work on our Chamberlain here, but before we get started, I just wanted to ask everybody, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe. It makes a huge difference to me when people subscribe. Anyway, we'll get back on with the Chamberlain. We've got our two brake shoes relined. So when they reline them, this surface here is a wear surface. The old ones were an asbestos pad on them. This is a modern material that is asbestos free, so that the steel part of this is still original. All they've done is remove the old lining and put new lining on here for us. This will make these brake pads good for another 30 years probably. I don't know how long they weren't working for, but yeah, should be good for another 30 years or so. So we're going to go through the reassembly process now. So the first part of reassembling this is to reassemble this part here. This is the cam that operates the brakes, spreads the brake shoes, and it was seized up around this collar here. So we've freed it up, we've cleaned it up. This works perfectly freely now. So we're just going to put a smear of grease around here to stop it seizing up again next time, because there's nothing to keep the water and mud from getting in the back of it here. And you know, it's worked well enough for some of its life. So we don't want to get too much grease in here because we don't want it to get in on the brake shoes, because that's greasing the brakes is not the ideal thing to do. We're also just going to put a little wipe on the cams here. This will just help the roller run a bit more smoothly. Now to reassemble this, we can actually put this bracket on first. So we use the two odd looking bolts with the stripped nuts, or the nuts that have no thread in them. We're just going to put a little smear of anti-seize on the threads so that they come apart a bit more easily next time. Now we need to remember when we're putting it together that this nut with no thread in it here needs to sit in the slots in here to keep it in the right spot. So that the nut is effectively just a spacer. But it's got to be lined up so that everything fits in properly. Okay, we don't want to do these up tight until after we've got the rest of the brakes back together. Now we can slide our shaft back in and line up our bracket in here. And that swings nice and smoothly now, which is what we need and what it wasn't doing before. Convenient. I'm also going to just loosely put the lock nuts on the back of these bolts here as well, just so that they're sort of in the right spot, ready to do up a bit later on. Now to get this shaft out, we actually undid this bracket under here. So the next thing I'm going to do is put the two nuts back on that hold this bracket on. So the next thing we're going to do is put one of these little pegs back in here. These are the pegs that support the brake shoes. Oh, and so threaded at that end, threaded at that end, 3/4 nut in the middle, spring washer goes on first. So I discovered partway through this job that it's actually easier to leave these pins out until later, and to put the large spring that we are about to put on the brake shoes next on the two shoes, and then drop the two shoes over from the top already connected together with the spring. This makes everything much easier for the rest of assembly. Okay, now these brake shoes, although they look almost identical, they are slightly different, and it's to do with where this roller here sits on the cam. So they are in fact marked. This one says rear here, this one says front here. So you've got to make sure you get them the right way around so that they operate correctly. We'll start by hanging the rear one in place. So they fit with the roller into the bottom of the cam like that there. Put the front one on too, and you can probably see that one a little bit better. Obviously this one needs adjusting a little bit more to release it properly and let it sit right back down into place. The next thing we want to put on is this spring here. It goes between these two countersunk holes in the top here. These are really heavy springs and they're quite awkward to put on. There are special tools you can get to help you with these. But I don't have one of the special tools. So we'll see if we can do it the alternative way. That wasn't that hard. The next two will be. Okay, these springs here can be quite tricky to get into place. They go with the short leg through the shoe, and the longer leg goes around this bracket here once we get everything back in place. So to put them in, you've got to sort of hook them right round, and they only just sort of fit. Then you've got to get your shoes sitting right back up against here before you can put the bracket in and get them all hooked up. Then this bracket goes back onto these two pegs with the spring hanger facing upwards, and then you've got to try and get the two springs into that groove there, which is not easy to do. Because they only just fit as well. Now I think you can actually take these two pins here out from behind, and then your pads would go a bit closer together, but I don't know that you'd easily get them back in with this bracket in the way. So we're just going to hook a little wire loop around the end and use a pair of pliers to hopefully pull that spring and hook it around the end of that, that spring hanger. Okay, so if we slide the brake shoes so they hang as low as we possibly can get them, we can just hopefully get these two springs onto this spring hanger here. There's really not much room for doing it, but I think there is just enough. Then we just need to get this bracket down into the right place and back on its two pegs. Okay, next there's two little circlips to go back on, one on each of these posts here. To hold this bracket in place. Next we have these two pegs to go in. They hold the brake shoes up in the correct position. They need a spring washer on one end and a flat washer on the other end. And to get this in place, we're just going to need to bring this shoe up to its correct, or more correct, location. Then the fine thread end of this with the hole through it goes through the slot in here You can see it a bit better on this one. The slot in here in the brake shoe, this peg keeps the brake shoe in line in the right direction but still allows it to expand and contract. So we need to feed this end into the brake shoe first and through the slot. Then we lift the brake pad back up into the right sort of position for it to sit in. And then screw these pegs back into place. Just a little bit tricky to get it started with the spring pressure on it. the next thing we want to do is to put the flat washer back on here, then the little funny conical spring, then the castellated nut back on here. This just holds the brake shoes in place and stops them sort of wriggling around and hitting on the drum. So this doesn't need to be tight, it just needs to be tight enough to get the pin through the castellated nut. There's one of these on each side. And we put the pin in. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is just give the drum a quick clean down with some brake cleaner. I've already cleaned this down with petrol, just to make sure we've got all the grease and oil off the surfaces here. Now, before we can put the brake drums back on, there's two adjustments here underneath that we need to back right off as far as they will go. The first one is this screw adjustment here. This is the fine adjustment. There's a lock nut on the top, and then we need to back this big nut off as far as it will go. This allows those snail cams to turn around to their full extent again. But right up here there is a pin with, and this bracket here has 3 different spots that the pin can go in. So we need that pin right down on the first hole. I think currently it's in the second or third hole because these brakes were so worn out. So I'm going to undo them. Now that we've got our pin out in here, you can see the 3 holes a bit more easily. So the bottom hole down here is where we want to put the pin when we've got new pads. This second hole is the adjustment for when you've got far more worn out pads. I don't know what this third hole, I mean presumably the third hole is for when your brake pads are really worn out, but actually this doesn't reach around the corner there to be able to get the pin in. So it's a bit of a useless little third adjustment. But you can see now it's sitting down quite nicely on the first hole, and that means our brake shoes are fully contracted, ready to put the drum on. So before we go any further with putting the shoes on, I'm going to put the bottom pin in here, and I'm also going to reattach this linkage here now that everything will reach. Okay, so before we put the drum on, we're also going to put this shield piece on here. Doesn't need to be in exactly the right spot, just needs to be out of the way. Now when we go to lift the drum on, we need to make sure that we line up the 4 holes in the drum for these securing bolts with the holes in here, because there is not a hole between each pair of studs, so we need to just make sure we get the drum on the right way round. Next we're going to put in the 4 securing bolts to hold the drum on. These aren't really that important because the wheel nuts also hold the drum on. Now I'm just going to give the drum a tap with the block of wood just to make sure it's seated all the way back. It's fairly tight fit and I know it's not sitting right down at the moment. That's moved a fair bit further on. So the next thing that we need to do is do up these two bolts in the back here that hold that cam plate. Now to centre everything properly, we're just going to go and put the brakes on in the cab, and that will expand the shoes, hold everything in the centre, then we can come and do these up. Now up in the cab here we have the two brake pedals for the steering brakes, the right and left hand side. This one that we're doing is also the one that has the handbrake ratchet on it. So if we pull up this piece of metal here and twist it round, when we put our foot on the brake, it's going to lock down so that we can go outside and do those bolts up. To release the handbrake on this tractor, all we've got to do is pull this up, twist it back round again. Now the pedal is still locked down, but as soon as we push the pedal, it releases the ratchet and it springs back up. Now we can come back round in here. We can do this bolt up here. Oops, wrong way. Do these two up tight on the squares. And once they're tight, we'll hold the square and we'll do up the lock nut that's back in here. Now to adjust the brakes, we want to be able to turn the drum. It's in gear at the moment, so it is, I can't turn it very far, but it is loose and free. Now we come down under here to this adjustment here. We want to back off the lock nut on the top here and adjust this one up until the brakes just start dragging on the drum and we can't turn it by hand. Back this nut off half a turn or a turn so that they're not dragging. Now this does have a very slight cutout to go round here, and I'm not sure if that's just wear or whether it's been, I think it's been put in there to stop this vibrating loose. Once we've done that, we want to do up the lock nut again, and that will hold everything tight and in place. Now the last thing we need to do before we put the wheel back on is get this shield here on the back in the right spot so that it's not dragging on the brake drum. You just want to get that nice and square with back where it was before, all the way around. And then there is just a single bolt in the bottom down here to put in. Once we've put that on, turn the drum a little bit just to make sure nothing's scraping. That all seems fine. Now we just have to put the back wheel on and the reverse procedure of taking it off. Well, it's very nice to finally have working brakes on the Chamberlain. I hope you've enjoyed this little video and found it useful. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you again next time. Thanks, bye.